welcome in. Whether you're outside grilling, maybe you're mowing the lawn, maybe you're changing dirty diapers, or maybe you finally got a moment to sit back, relax, and listen to your favorite podcast. Whatever you're doing, thank you for listening and welcome into the Young Dad Podcast. I'm your host, Jay. Super excited to be with you. Super excited to have an amazing guest with me. Jamie, welcome to the show. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course, I'm super excited that I get to talk to you today. Before we get into it, and before I give the people a little bit of an introduction about you and your background and all that fun stuff, I wanted to just invite all the listeners that are listening right now to go ahead and head over to Patreon. We are now on Patreon. You can find the Young Dad Podcast over there, and you can become a patron for just as little as $1 a month and no more than $2 a month to get access to all the features and things we have going on over there. You get early access to all the episodes, exclusive Q&As, things like that. And additionally to that, our opening and our closing beats are always brought to you by the Podbeat app. Podbeat will allow you to turn any podcast or audiobook into a musical experience, which is absolutely fantastic. Couldn't recommend that enough. So enough of the business. Let me introduce Jaime Davis here. Jamie is a board-certified specialist in family law, as well as a certified family financial mediator and certified parenting coordinator. She supports all areas of family law, including complex, equitable distribution in child custody cases, child support, post-separation support, alimony, alienation of affection, affectation, and criminal conversation. You also handle family law contracts such as premarital, postnuptial, and separation and property settlement agreement. So a lot that you do, a lot there. That was a mouthful of specialties and things like that, but your main specialties: child custody, including interstate and relocation cases, child support complex, equitable distribution, post-separation support, alimony. And so that is one heck of a background, something that's really important to a lot of the demographics that listen to this podcast. A lot of conversations that I've had with a lot of different dads who are going through this. I've seen it firsthand play out, good and bad, for the dads in court, for myself in particular as well, how it's played out over the years and whatnot. So you have been deeply involved in family law for years now. So can you share a bit about what initially drew you into this field and how your personal experiences have possibly influenced your work as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So I wanted to be a lawyer ever since I was in probably elementary school, before I really even know what being a lawyer was all about. Finally made it to law school and thought I was going to maybe practice some sort of criminal law. Got there, took one family law class and absolutely fell in love with it. Took every family law class that my law school offered. And I've actually been practicing family law since I graduated law school back in 2001.
Very cool. And so when working in family law, what is a hill that you're willing to die on within family law?
What do you mean by that?
Like, what is something that you're super passionate about that maybe not colleagues or the system right now is also willing to be on? What's a hill that you're absolutely willing to die on, shout from the top of? That's absolute truth, that maybe is something that needs reform or something that needs change, something along those lines.
Yeah. So I think one of those would be that it is possible to have a divorce without destruction. So many people think that divorce is a zero-sum game where you have to basically go to war with your spouse or your co-parent to get what you want. And I have found in my years of practice that there are certain things that you can do to minimize the conflict, and that it doesn't have to be that way. Necessarily divorce or child custody issues are going to involve some level of conflict just by their very nature. But I think that there are ways that you can act throughout the process that you can try to minimize that conflict for yourself and especially for your children.
100%. No, I couldn't agree more. So what are some of those things that the average person going through a divorce can do? Because I know the things that I did that made it very low conflict, very quick, easy, painless, for both parties. Both got what we want in the end. And so what are some of those things that you have seen work really well to get to that point?
Yes. So I found that there are like 5 main steps that if folks will do these things, it can help improve the divorce experience for them. I mean, let's face it, most people don't want to be getting divorced, but if we can make it as painless as possible, that's the goal. I think the first thing to keep in mind is that you need to be mindful of how you broach the topic of separation with your spouse. Do your homework, be prepared. If you have not considered couples counseling and you're sort of on the fence about whether or not you really do want to be separated, go ahead and explore the couples counseling first, because once you let the cat out of the bag and say, hey, I want a separation, those are words that are really hard to take back, and can really impact the state of your marriage from that point forward. You also want to go ahead and start getting some of your financial documents in a row, get all that together so that you have it before the separation. Go ahead and consult with an attorney, so you at least know what you might be entitled to in the state that you live in. It's always good to know those things before you mention separation to your spouse. Something else that I think is really important in trying to have a divorce without destruction is assembling a team to support you. Separation and divorce are, one of the most stressful life events that folks often go through. And having a team together to give you some extra support is crucial, in my opinion. Um, on that team, you're going to want your lawyer, potentially a therapist, maybe a financial advisor, maybe a divorce coach. And absolutely, you're going to want a really good friend on that team, somebody that you can talk to about things that maybe you don't want to pay your attorney or therapist to talk about, but to just have somebody else to, bounce some ideas off of. It's always a really good idea. I think a few more things that folks can do if they really want to try to minimize conflict in their situation is to get clear on what's important to them and be willing to let go of the rest, right? Like, we don't get everything we want when we're going through a separation. And it's really important to pick your battles and figure out whether or not something is an important issue to you.
I love that. Sorry, I was taking notes because there was so much good stuff there to jump into. So there was like more than the 5 things you mentioned there, but those are all super important. If I think back to my divorce and compare it there, I wish I would have done most of these things. I didn't. I personally, when my divorce happened, yes, it caught me off guard, but it also didn't catch me off guard because I knew it was coming for some months, kind of thing. And so it really didn't catch me too much off guard. I was not prepared for it. I don't think you're ever really prepared to have that conversation. You're not ever really prepared to go into that and whatnot. But being mindful of how that topic is brought up in the very beginning, because as soon as it was brought up, there was something, it was just all downhill from there. Like, if I think back to my situation in particular, like, it was all downhill. When it is brought up, it's all downhill from there. When it's starting to move in that direction, it's all downhill. No ifs, ands, or buts. Like, it feels broken, and it can be hard to repair and to retract those words. Those are some of the most serious words ever out there. If you're serious about it, if it's a serious situation, then it can be hard. So I love that part that you mentioned there. And I love that how you mentioned just assembling a team to support you. That's in my field I work in. I work in mental health. And so one of the big aspects of the specific program I work in is natural supports. Finding people who are naturally in your life who can support you, who you can call, who will be there to pick you up on a hard day, who will literally pick you up if you were in jail or something, and just be there to support you. If you need to step out, take a phone call or make a phone call because maybe court went sideways that day. You just need someone there to talk to. Those are the people to lean on. So that's something that I personally didn't have. I didn't have this team to support me. I did most of it myself, went through most of it myself, and I had I kind of shut out all my friends after when it all was happening. So I did the opposite. I shut everybody out, friends, family, everybody. And that was probably the biggest mistake because I lost a lot of friendships. I lost a lot of relationships within my family, not within my family, but mostly really close friendship. People who were trying to reach out, be there, support me. I just didn't let them be there for me. I was like, no, I don't want to talk about it. I'm not going to talk to you or anyone about this kind of thing. This is my battle to fight it. I'm going to fight it. And, additionally, knowing what's important to you. And that second part you mentioned on that one, willing to let go of the rest. I feel so much when I've seen divorce happen, whether it's in my family or whether it's clients I work with, that they or just other men I talk to on social media and whatnot, they're so unwilling to let go of certain things. Even if they're small, they're minuscule, or just the weirdest, littlest details. They just don't want to let go of these. But they don't know why they don't want to let go of those things. They're holding on for some reason, holding on to some hope. And that can be really hard because for men, like this was, kind of what we were trained, like this is going to be our one and only, and the thing that we were going to do, the thing that we were going to commit to, we're committed here, we put the work in here, and now it's over kind of thing. So it can be really hard. But that's kind of my take on what you said there. So overall, in your experience, what are some of the most common misconceptions about divorce, especially when children are involved?
So I think one of the biggest misconceptions that I think a lot of dads have actually, at least in North Carolina where I practice, our judges in Wake County tend to lean toward 50-50 custody schedules unless there's some really good reason why one parent is not fit for 50-50 custody. And I think a lot of dads can be under the misconception that mom is always going to get primary custody of the child. And, frankly, these days, it's just not true in a lot of cases. And so I would really encourage dads who want significant custodial time with their children to talk to their attorneys about their options for, getting that time with their kids, to see, if in their area that's something that might be possible.
I couldn't agree with that more. I think that is like the number one misconception in divorce is that no matter what state you live in, pretty much, unless it's maybe a deep red state or something, like it's deep red to the roots kind of thing, then maybe you have a fighting chance, more or less, or unless something extreme happened in one case or another. But dads normally feel like they're gonna lose that battle from the beginning. I know I thought I was well, I know I thought I was gonna struggle with it, but I ended up with 50-50, and I'm the custodial parent of my girls, and so it worked out for me. I've seen it work out even here in Washington State. I've seen it work out for a dad who I was working with for a long time. He ended up getting full custody of his kids, going from 0 to 50-50 once he filed everything, and he fought his own battle. Like, he did it all himself. He navigated the court system. He constantly researched. He didn't have a lawyer, but he was able to go from 0 custody and just false allegations all the time to where he had his 50-50, and then there was still more allegations and protection orders, and he fought those, and then they were unfounded, and all this stuff. It was back and forth for a year and a half. It was insane, maybe even longer, but it was a long battle that he fought. And he ended up just recently, at the time of this recording, probably about a month or so ago, he ended up getting full custody of his kids, to where the mother was discredited in court. The judge told her, you hold little credibility in court, your stories aren't true, that kind of thing. And then he was awarded full custody of kids while she gets visitation every other weekend. He has full decision making for everything, and it was just like a whole turnaround from 0 to 100 over the course of a year. It was a battle to fight, but I mean, if you're willing to fight it, fight it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it's one of those things when I was saying earlier, get clear on what's important to you. If your kids are worth fighting for, if they're important to you, having time with them, that's one of those battles that you pick, right? Like,
Mhm.
maybe you don't fight over the furniture in the house and who gets the sofa, but it's absolutely worth the time, the energy, the expense to potentially gain substantial custodial time with your kids if that's something that is important to you. And back to some tips for trying to make this as low conflict as you can. Try to keep the divorce focused on what's in the best interests of your children. And if you do that, it will serve you well in the long run. What I mean by that is kids do not need to be involved in the adult discussions, decisions. They do not need to be in the conflict. They don't need to hear you talking negatively about their other parent. They don't need to be asked to serve as messengers between you and the other parent. And they certainly don't need to be treated like a confidant. I know sometimes it's not always, intuitive how to act in these situations, and little innocent comments like, "Oh, I miss you so much when you're at mom's house," or "I miss you so much when you're at dad's house." It gets to a point where your child may start feeling responsible for your mental health as the parent, and that it's
Hmm.
their job to make you feel better. And that's not their job, right? Like, we just want kids to be kids and for them to love both of their parents and to have a great time at both households and for it to be as stress free on them as possible.
100%. And I think that's huge, making sure that it's focused on the children, because a lot of times divorce gets personal. It gets personal very quickly. It gets personal
Absolutely.
to tear down the other parties. I don't know. It was probably three to five different consultations that I had with lawyers and whatnot when I was in the process of my divorce that would ask me, do you're wanting to like take her down, right? And like get full custody and do all these things. Like, not really. I don't really want to do that. So then it was, okay, we're done here, kind of thing. I had one lawyer that hung up on me because that's not what I wanted to do. And so it's making sure that you are doing what's in best interest of your children. Yes, it's hard to put those personal feelings aside, but I couldn't agree more. Like, they don't need to be involved in the adult discussions. They shouldn't hear the adult discussions, and they 100% shouldn't hear the negative. Actually, here in the state of Washington, on the like divorce like papers, or like you get a thick packet from like the county clerk when you get divorced that you have to fill out, but it literally says throughout that it is unlawful, so it's against the law to talk negatively about the other party in front of the children, and that's something that you can be held in contempt for here in the state of Washington, if it's proven and founded. So it's something that you have to be super careful about, navigate about. People still do it all the time, but it's literally in those court documents that you received and you fill out, and you're signing that you're not going to do it, um, to not do it. So that's another big part of it. Something that I'm really big on is just making sure kids aren't involved. You're not treating them like a confidant or a messenger, because they aren't that. They're kids. They deserve to just try to cope and navigate the situation as it is, because it's already going to be really hard on them. It's already going to be incredibly difficult for them to learn to transition between going from one home to two homes and adjusting to a new schedule while maybe in the middle of a school year, while maybe trying to navigate friendships, or maybe they have to change schools, so now they have to make new friends. So keeping them in the forefront and keeping them their like what's in their best interest, like you said, in front there. So yeah, it's sad to see that doesn't always happen. But
Yeah,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, I love to hear that you had multiple consultations. I hate that your first experiences were not great, but I think it's really important that clients trust their lawyers like they trust their doctor. And if you have a consultation with an attorney and you just don't feel like it's a good fit for you, that their style does not match what your goals are, and if they want to approach it in a different way than you're comfortable with, absolutely go have consultations with other attorneys until you find someone who is a good fit for you and your goals.
100%. One of my buddies is currently in a divorce process, and he's had to switch attorneys a couple times. He's like, man, I just can't with these attorneys, and I'm like, well, just remember, like, your attorney works for you, and you're paying them to do a job for you. Like, yes, they may have they know how to do all the things, but they also may have a bias, or they also may have a way that they go about things, like you're mentioning now. So making sure that your attorney works for you and does the things that you want and sees, and you kind of goes back to exactly what you said towards the beginning there. Know what you want, know what you're entitled to, get your things in order, and know what's really important to you to get out of this process. And pick those battles and fight for those things and whatnot. So knowing that, I feel, before going into it, super important. But then as those things discover, if your lawyer is unwilling to help you get that thing, then maybe it's time for a new lawyer. You know. So
Yeah, I think with that said, it's also important to know that the lawyer's job is to, of course, counsel the client about what the law is and also to
mhm,
talk to them about risks, like the risk of going to court. Does the attorney think that they have, we'll call them, good facts to support whatever the goal is that they're hoping to
mhm,
reach? And in some cases, folks may have unrealistic expectations about things that can happen in court. One of the things I see a lot, it's more of a child support issue, but clients get very frustrated with me here in North Carolina when I tell them I cannot make their spouse pay for their children's college tuition. That's not something our courts here are able to do. And so, even though they really want mom or dad to agree to pay for the child's college, I just can't make that happen here in North Carolina unless it's part of a private contract that both people have agreed to. So, in cases like that, I think the lawyer can actually help the client pick some of their battles. If there are certain
Mm,
things that you simply can't get if you go to court, then the lawyer can talk about that with the client and help them refocus on something that maybe they can attain.
I agree with that as well. You know, because there are some things that we just don't know. I think one of the biggest advantages of having like a good lawyer that you trust and you respect, and they're able to have those conversations with you that are simple. And be like, okay, hey, that's a little unrealistic. That's something that maybe not the best thing to do. This is what the law says, and helping kind of provide some logic to those emotions kind of thing, and being able to check the person and being able to help them see the compromise and see what's actually willing. And then the biggest part about having a lawyer is that the lawyer's more than likely gonna already know the different judges that sit on these family court panels and know which way they lean and know what side they normally go for. So just being able to find a lawyer that balances all those things, right? That's on your side, that'll fight for the things that you want, but also be realistic and be able to check you at the same time is also super important um, as well. So let me see here. Where do I want to go? Let's go here. We kind of already talked about this one a little bit, but so child custody battles, they are emotionally draining for all parties. And so what are some strategies outside of the ones we may have already mentioned with like therapists and having a good team and whatnot to help minimize the impact of their children during these disputes? So how can we additionally help the kids not be emotionally drained by these custody disputes?
So I think it starts at the beginning. And again, it all goes back to how you broach the topic of separation. That is a very adult decision that gets made, it's a very adult discussion. And it's really important if parents can be on the same page for how they tell their children about the separation and what's going to happen. Um, I am obviously not a child psychologist. I'm just an attorney. But
Mhm.
based on conversations that I've had with other psychologists, what they have said to me is that it's really important to have a plan in place for what's going to happen before you tell the kids. That they tend to do better if they know, hey, this is what the schedule is going to be. I'm going to be here with mom on these days. I'm going to be here with dad on these days, because it's more stabilizing for them. So I think it's really important if mom and dad can get along well enough to, be on the same team when they tell the kids. That can be really helpful for the children, and make it easier for them as they go into that transition.
I can 100% agree with that. The biggest thing that's helped, especially my older daughter, when because my younger daughter, she was literally 5 months old when it was all happened, so she was literally born into it and grew up with it, and it's just completely normal to her. But my other daughter, she was 4 when it all happened, so she was a bit older and a bit more aware of everything when it all happened. She's incredibly smart, and so for her, it's just knowing the schedule. She would go to preschool and she would go to kindergarten and whatnot, and she would ask her teacher, "Okay, who's picking me up today?" Because she just it was an unknown. It was hard for her to like get
Mhm.
used to it. Like, who's picking me up? Where am I going? Uh, Away, I thought I was gonna go here, and then this changed, and so the changes and the transitions and the impacts, they definitely affect kids. But then being able to know and have a little bit more like obviousness, like, okay, well, this is clear and concise to what's going to happen and things like that. So with these transitions and whatnot, so I guess to kind of frame this question a little bit. So we've seen some rising concerns about mental and emotional health of children amid family separation. So especially during COVID-19, these separations and divorces went up a lot, which you thought it would happen to stay with your spouse in the same space for long periods of time would maybe bring you closer, but I guess that wasn't the case for everybody. But so what are some of the additionally kind of what we're talking about here? What are some of those additional critical steps parents can take to help support their children's well-being during the like transition periods to where they're going from one house to two house, or changing their schedules, additionally to them just knowing their schedules. But what can the parents do to help make the navigation from being in the same home to now co-parenting a little bit easier?
Yeah, I think there's several things. So kids shouldn't feel like they're moving back and forth between mom's house and dad's house. I think it's really important to the extent parents have the financial means to afford it. And of course, that is not, the case for every family. But if they do, to the extent they can duplicate things at the houses so that the child is not having to shuffle a suitcase back and forth. Of course, there are going to be some things like a favorite stuffed animal or maybe an iPad or something like that that the child may take back and forth. But for the most part, if the parents can try to have, complete sets of clothes, toiletries, favorite items, those sorts of things at both houses. I also think it's really important for co parenting if the parents can at least be cordial to one another in front of the children. You don't have to mean it, you can fake it, but at least be nice to your child's other parent in front of the children. It really does send a bad message to the child if you're at a soccer game or a basketball game or whatever the thing is, and you can't even greet your child's other parent. You certainly don't need to engage them in some lengthy conversation, but to the extent you can say hello, acknowledge them, how you doing, and then go watch the game, that sends a really positive message to your child. I mean, at the end of the day, your child is half you and half your child's other parent. And so when you are being mean or rude to your child's other parent, the child could potentially internalize that and be like, wow, mom doesn't like dad. Does that mean mom doesn't like part of me because I act like dad, or whatever the
Hmm.
case may be?
Yeah, 100%. I think that cordialness is really important. Um, and then just keeping the conversations, and after keeping them extremely transactional, keeping everything you do with the other person just extremely transactional, because now that it's said, it's done, you're in the process of separation, or now you're co-parenting, like, they, at least in my opinion, like, you don't owe them the lengthy explanations. You don't owe them the why behind you make decisions. You don't owe them the emotional, like, outpouring that you would give them as if you guys were still together, kind of thing. Like, all that can stop, um, and be done, because they don't need that anymore. They obviously don't want it, because now you're divorced and separated. So they don't need to be told all that. You keep it transactional, tell them what they need to be told, and beyond that, like, the conversation should be about what the kids need, or kids things and things like that. Outside of that, it's very little to no contact after that. So at least in my take. So
No, I think that's a very great point. And actually, there is a really good book out there. It was written by Bill Eddy. He writes about a lot of high conflict stuff and how to communicate with high conflict people. And he has a book called BIF for co parenting. And BIF stands for brief, informative, friendly, and firm. And basically, that's how you should craft your responses when you are talking to your co-parent and trying to co-parent. And I think something else that's really important to point out is that in most cases, each parent is responsible for making the day-to-day decisions for the child when the child is with them. But in cases where folks have joint legal custody, at least in North Carolina, they're required to discuss and mutually agree upon major decisions for the child,
mm,
which would include like education, medical, whether or not the
mhm,
child needs counseling, things like that. And so, back to what you were saying, when you're having to discuss these major decisions with your co-parent, you're right. Like you don't really have to go into this long diatribe about the whys and, all of those things, but you do need to at least have the discussion with the co-parent and attempt to reach an agreement on it. And that can be in writing, right? Like if it's a high
mhm,
conflict case, maybe you and your co-parent aren't picking up the phone and talking to each other, but maybe you're emailing, and in those emails, you can go back and read it and do a little snark check before you send it to make sure you're not saying anything that you
mhm.
shouldn't to your child's co parent. But yeah, you're totally right. Like leaving all of the emotion out of it and just making it transactional about the child is the way to go.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And that part can be extremely difficult to, when it comes to, yes, like, day-to-day decisions, like, that part sucks so much, because at least I feel, and like in my situation that I've been pointed out by like my brother and like family and whatnot, it's like my girls can take 5 steps forward when they're with me, right? in different areas and do different things and, progress in different ways. But when they go back to their moms, they take 3 steps back. So when they come back, they're only 2 steps forward. No harm or foul to her, but it feels that way and it appears that way with their behavior, things like that. That there's different areas where they regress and progress and whatnot when they're with me and when they're with her, kind of thing. And so that part can be really difficult, like the day-to-day stuff, because it's like and this is important to know too, like you can't control the day-to-day stuff, those day-to-day decisions, those little things. But those bigger conversations are things that you have to agree on, like extracurriculars, especially if you guys are both expected to pay, that you have to agree on, the extracurriculars. That one been my Achilles heel, because it's like my girls want to do something, I want to get my girls into certain thing. So it's either I just take on the whole cost, which is normally what I have to do anyways, or have to tell my older daughter to, okay, you want to do this? Yes. Okay, then you have to have this conversation at 7 with her mom and say, hey, mom, I want you to support me in this kind of thing. This is what I want to do. I want you to support me in this. And like that sucks to have to coach my 7-year-old to have that conversation with her mom, where it's not just, okay, cool, you want to do it, great, where she has to like ask the permission, like for her blessing to do certain activities and whatnot. So it's super frustrating in that aspect. But yeah, keeping those decisions like brief, informative, friendly, informed. Like I would love to read that book there too. But okay, this one is one that I'm curious about, and from your take there. So with more parents co-parenting across state lines, or even potentially internationally. I don't know how many co-parents. I've never seen a co-parenting situation internationally, but how do individuals navigate these complex interstate custody cases? And what should parents keep in mind? So I'm sure, being on the East Coast there with North Carolina, South Carolina, and the multiple states right there. So how can parents navigate these interstate custody cases?
So I would say before you consider a relocation, you should talk to an attorney about what a custody schedule could potentially look like if you relocate and the judge says the kids can go with you. One of the risks here is that the court may find that it's not in the best interest of the children to move. And so the court can't keep you here, but they can say, if you relocate, I'm switching custody, and your child's other parent is going to have primary and you're going to have secondary. And when you are dealing with custody schedules between states, they're not ideal for kids. Typically, especially if it's a long distance, let's say we're talking about, I don't know, East Coast, West Coast, or something like that. One parent is most likely going to have custody of the children for the majority of the school year, and the other parent is going to have custody of the children for the major breaks like holiday breaks and also the summer. And so that can be really tough on the kids in terms of friendships, activities, and those sorts of things. The child will make a whole set of friends during the school year with one parent, only to be uprooted and have to go to the other parent's house for the whole summer, where they're probably going to make a whole new set of friends. So those are not going to be their friends that they go to school with. I mean, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but I think parents just don't understand what schedules look like when folks live in different states. And truly, it can be that, you may have primary custody of your kid, but for the whole summer, he or she is going to be in a different state with their other parent.
Yeah. No, that can be incredibly difficult. Like here in Washington, it literally says like if you're planning on moving out of like the school district boundaries, so you have like the school district to be within to like move around and stuff. But if you are planning on moving outside those school district boundaries, then you have to give a 60-day notice to court. And then the other party has that within that 60 days, that first 30 days, to file an appeal for any changes they want made to the custody plan and whatnot, transportation, things like that, to make sure it's all notified and whatnot. Which I think keeping like in the same school district is the most ideal, because then you're at least in the same county. You're still near each other, but you can be far enough apart at your pleasure and whatnot. Like the likelihood of you seeing each other doing different things, unless you go to all the same places all the time, then that's one thing. But you're most likely very rarely going to see the other person, things like that. So just I like that part of like the parenting plan here in Washington State. But I couldn't imagine doing it across state lines, because that would be so complex. Like there was a time where I almost moved to the other side of Washington State. I live in Eastern Washington right now in the Tri-Cities. I almost moved to the west side for a job and whatnot, and started over before I met my now wife. And so, well, we were already kind of like dating and whatnot. So she was like, I don't know if she knows it, but she was like the reason why I didn't end up taking that job and moving over there, because I didn't want to be that far away from her and jeopardize where our relationship was going. But, it would have meant that I would have had to probably take that side of the schedule to where I had them for like the summer and whatnot and left them here and then picked them up during the summer and things like that for extended breaks and whatnot. And so that was one part that I was just like, I can't do it. So those two compounded, a now wife and having to give up so much time with my children, were like the two biggest factors to why I didn't do those things and why I had to really think it through and take those different things on. So, let's see. Okay. Two more questions here, just kind of about divorce in general, and then we'll get wrapped up here. So, financial disputes can be one of the toughest parts of a divorce. So, can you explain a little bit about the importance of, if they're important to the individual, I feel, but the importance of premarital or postnuptial agreements, especially in protecting both parties during a separation?
Yeah, so premarital agreements are not just for wealthy folks. I think that is a common misconception, especially for people who may have children and have been married before. A premarital agreement is probably a good idea to at least explore. In those agreements, you can go ahead and work out who is going to get what property, meaning if you want to call something separate property, you can go ahead and define it in the agreement so that there's not a fight over it later. You can also define what's going to be marital property, and these definitions could be different than what the law would otherwise provide. And you can go ahead and set out in the agreement how that marital property will be divided in the event of a separation. Premarital agreements are also useful for discussing and setting what alimony will be, if anything. Also, you can go ahead and waive inheritance rights. In North Carolina, there are various inheritance rights that you acquire just by virtue of the fact that you're married. And you can go ahead and waive those in a premarital agreement if you want to. And that's really important for folks who may want to leave the bulk of their estate to their children that they have from a prior relationship. And so I would encourage folks, if you are especially embarking upon a second relationship, to at least consider a premarital agreement. Post-nuptial agreements are a little bit different. They're basically like sort of property settlement agreements that you enter into after you get married. We see those a lot in cases where, let's say, somebody had an affair and they want to get back together and work on the marriage, but they don't want to have to worry about the financial aspects of what will happen if this reconciliation doesn't work. And so they may consider a postnuptial agreement to go ahead and talk about the property issues and get those sorted so that they can focus on the relationship.
I love that. Super important. I've never had either of those. Never been in a position to have either of those, but it makes a lot of sense, especially going into reconciliation or into a second marriage, to make sure that you're protected, because you already went through the pain one time. And so going through it again may be really devastating. I know for me, it devastated me in a lot of ways. So I think that's great too. Didn't even know these things existed when I was going through it, again, because I didn't really consult with an attorney. I didn't consult with any financial advisors because, I didn't really have a reason to. I just was kind of handling it and just wanted to get it done and over with as fast as possible. So I think that was probably one of my biggest mistakes. So last question about the topic here, and then we'll move into closing, and then just some fun questions that I have for you as well. But as a parent and as a professional, what advice would you give to other parents navigating their own divorces, especially those balancing their careers and family responsibilities?
Oh, wow. So I would say probably prioritize your emotional health and self-care. It's really important that you take care of yourself so that you can still take care of your children. And also so you can make really good decisions when it comes to your divorce case, because those are going to impact you for a long time. I tell my clients that there are lots of decisions that I can make for you, but there are some I just can't. I can't tell you whether or not you're willing to accept a certain settlement proposal. I can't tell you what custody schedule is going to be in the best interest of your children. And so I need my clients to be emotionally and mentally healthy enough that they can participate with me in the process and make really good decisions for themselves.
That makes total sense. Because if you're not, those decisions are going to be not the best. Some of them may not be those best interest things, and they're going to be those things that are emotionally charged and emotionally maybe discharge because you're just exhausted or you don't have the mental fortitude to make the decision. So maybe you miss a deadline because you as the attorney don't have an answer from me as your client to make that decision. So maybe things fall by the wayside, or maybe you lose out on something you really wanted because you're not mentally sharp enough. So 100% couldn't agree with that more. That is something super important, and that also trickles into the children, right? Something that very quickly can trickle down to the children, because if you're mentally tired or emotionally tired, maybe you're taking that out on the children in some type of way during this process, and that could come back negatively on you. So I think that one's great. So before we get into the the fun part of the interview, where we just have some fun questions here that I have for you, I just want to shout out the sponsors of the podcast today. Forefathers Apparel and the June app and Dad Bod Apparel. These are all 3 brands, companies that I work with that have been love me. I love them. It's a love relationship there. Forefathers Apparel, changing dad or clothing for dad. Light, breathable, fun, authentic, conversation starting polos where you look great, you feel great, and you start conversations. And other men, when you're out in public, will give you a double take. Happens to me every time I wear one of these polos, and it makes you feel kind of good because that man wishes he was you wearing that polo. So go to forefathersapparel.com and use the code YoungDad to save 20%. And then additionally, Dad Bod Apparel, use the code YNGDAD15 to save 15% on your order to get your merch that you see me wear, the support your local girl dad hat, Dad Bod hats, and whatnot. Dad Bod Apparel, 100% love them. They are great. They are expanding their warehouse that they are doing just fantastic. I love seeing them grow. And lastly, the June app, JOON. I couldn't say enough good things about June. If your kids struggle with habits, behavior, routine, anything like that, and you want to incentivize them with a game and coins and be able to have really easy conversations when it comes to habits, routines, and behaviors, the June app is exactly what you need. You can try it for free by following the link in the description of this episode. And then if you love it, use the code YoungDad and you'll save some money off your annual membership there. So I think that's all the business. Everyone I wanted to shout out. So Jamie, if you could create a family law survival kit for parents going through a divorce, what are the top 3 items you would absolutely need to be in it?
I would put in their survival kit a planner/calendar to keep up with all of the kids' activities and the schedule of the going back and forth. I would also include a therapist because I think almost everyone going through a divorce needs one. And the third thing I would include would be some sort of like coupon for some sort of, self-care activity, depending upon the person, whether they like to go to the spa, whether they like to go out to a nice dinner, whatever it is that they like to do to take care of them. I think that's really important.
I love that. Second one here. So there's 4 of these. And so imagine you could rewrite. I have a speech impediment. I'm sorry. One rule about divorce or custody that would make life easier for parents. What would it be and why?
About custody. So I think that's really tough because I would say to make it less subjective, but I think it has to be subjective because each family is so different. And so custody is supposed to be what's in the best interest of the children. I don't know. I think that's really tough. Like, I think it has to be subjective. And I like that about the custody process.
Mm-hmm. What about divorce?
Divorce in general. I think in North Carolina, folks here have to be separated for a really long time before they can get a divorce. You have to be separated for a year and a day before you can file. Sometimes I think that might be a little long. And then other times I'm like, well, some folks need that long to get it all together. So that might be something I would consider changing, is to shorten that a little bit in some cases if it's not as complicated. Something else I would try to fix would be the length of time it takes for some of these cases to move through the court system. Unfortunately, we have quite a backlog, and it can take cases, more than a year, some 2 years or so to get through the system. And so if there was something that I could do and wave a magic wand to make things get through there quicker, I would do that.
I love that. Yes, I couldn't agree with that more. If you could compare the process of navigating a complex custody case to any sport, what would it be?
I think dodgeball for sure. You never know what's going to be thrown at you. There's lots of different issues that can come up. Things that may seem to be innocuous, the other side might turn into some, huge mountain that you find yourself having to defend against. And so I think dodgeball for sure.
For sure, because if you can dodge a wrench, you can dodge a ball, and there's a lot of
Absolutely.
wrenches and balls being thrown at you in these cases. Last one here, and then I have my final question that I like to ask every guest. If there was a reality TV show about your work as a family law attorney, what would it be called, and what would be a dramatic moment that the viewers would see?
I would probably call it Never a Dull Moment. And dramatic moment, there are so many. I don't know that I could pick one. Just the things that people say sometimes are baffling.
I like it. Yeah, people say some things. I love seeing those TikToks about these like court cases where the judges are just like baffled by what's being said to them while they're on the stand, and these people are 100% serious. Like they mean every single letter coming out of their mouth, like wholeheartedly. And I'm like, okay, very cool. All right, last one here. If let's say a young mother came to you, she just had her first baby, she's 18 to 22 years old. Let's say she's unsure kind of the relationship status with her and the father of the child and whatnot. Let's say they're okay, they're still together and whatnot. So that's not a part of this, but she's just coming to you. She's nervous, she's scared, she can't get the words out. What kind of advice would you have for a young mother, young brand new mother? Just one or two pieces of advice for her.
Just in general about
Just in
parenting.
general, yeah. Just in general about life, parenting, the situation she's in. Again, she's like 18 to 22 years old, so she's super young.
Yeah, I would say you don't have to be perfect. You just have to show up. And you just have to be good enough. You know, you need to take care of your child and be there for your child, but none of us are perfect parents and we all make mistakes. But at the end of the day, your kids are going to remember that you were there for them.
I love that. I love that. Well, Jaime, this has been super fun, super exciting, great interview, great conversation that we've had today. Please tell the people where they can learn more about you, follow you, keep up with you, all the things. Anything you want to plug about yourself, go ahead and do so.
Yeah, sure. So I host a podcast, A Year and a Day, Divorce Without Destruction. It's available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcast. I've written a book by the same name, Year and a Day, Divorce Without Destruction, available on Amazon. My law firm website is divorcestough.com. Lots of good information there. And I'm also on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram.
Perfect. Well, Jaime, thank you so much. And of course, thank you to our listeners for tuning in today. Make sure you go to Apple, Spotify, YouTube, do all the things you can do to support on all the social medias as well, like, follow, subscribe, all the things that you know what to do. Come on, I don't got to tell you. You hear it on every podcast you listen to. So go ahead and do all those things. And lastly, of course, again, like I said at the top, go ahead and head over to Patreon. The link is in the description of this episode. And go become a patron to support this podcast. And to continue to help see it grow and go to new heights. Jaime, again, thank you for your time today. I really appreciate it. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in today. We'll talk to you next time right here on the Young Dad Podcast. Bye-bye.